Go ahead, John.
Good afternoon. I'm John Matea, President of the Goldwater Foundation. It's my pleasure to welcome you to another webinar hosted by the Foundation and Scholarship America. Today's webinar features Goldwater scholars who are currently in graduate school. They have a lot to tell you about the graduate school application process, applying for graduate fellowships, and life in graduate school. Having Goldwater scholars helping Goldwater scholars is an important new direction for the Goldwater program. Today's webinar was organized by three members of the Goldwater Scholar community, Matt Schoenbauer, Aaron Sandoval, and Daniela Morrow. Daniela will be introducing our speakers, Matt will be asking our speakers your questions, and Aaron will be closing the webinar and letting you know how to continue the conversation with our panelists on Slack, our communication platform. Before we start, I would like to introduce Linda Zulsdorf and Laura Mickle from Scholarship America. They will tell you how you can best participate in this webinar. Thank you for taking time today to participate in the webinar, and do continue to ask your questions on our Slack platform. Enjoy the webinar.
Hi, hello from the Scholarship America team. I'm Linda Zulsdorf, Lead Program Manager, and I'm joined by Laura Mickle, who co-manages the program. Thank you for joining the webinar today. As John mentioned, we will be here monitoring the questions box and forwarding your questions to the panelists. Please submit your questions to us using the questions box on your screen. Later in the webinar, Matt will ask the panelists a few of your questions.
Hi, this is Laura. I'm honored to be with you today. We are also here for support. If you have any questions regarding GoToWebinar, please contact us using the chat function, and we will try our best to assist you. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniela Morrow, and I'm a 2018 Goldwater Scholar from Boise State University. So I'd like to introduce all our scholars, and before we begin, I would like to introduce all of our speakers. They are all brilliant graduate students and Goldwater scholars / honorable mentions from top universities around the world. They all come from different backgrounds and study different things. They are excited to share their experiences in graduate school and give advice about both applying to and succeeding in a graduate degree. So first up, we have Emily Crabb. She is a graduate student at MIT, where she studies physics. She's in her 5th year of graduate school, working on computer modeling of reactions in batteries. Emily is also an NSF GRFP Fellow, National Defense Science and Engineering Graduate Fellow, and the DOE Computational Science Graduate Fellow. Emily has interned at DOE Naval Reactors Program in Argonne National Laboratory, and she recently spent 4 weeks volunteering at RBK, a nonprofit coding boot camp in Amman, Jordan, through MIT's Global Teaching Labs program. Next, we have Dev Dabke. He is a PhD student at Princeton, studying applied computational math. Dev is in his 2nd year of graduate school, where his primary research is in the theoretical foundations of machine learning. He is particularly interested in over-parametrization of neural nets. He also works on various inclusion and diversity issues in STEM and math. He graduated from Duke in 2018 and has also studied at Oxford and the University of Paris. Naomi Burrow is a doctorate student and Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, where she studies chemical engineering. Naomi is currently in her 2nd year of graduate school, where her research explores potential materials for nuclear fusion reactors. She has interned at top labs such as the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, CERN, and Intel. She is passionate about increasing diversity in engineering and science, serving as the Region 2 Vice Chairperson of the National Society of Black Engineers, and now as a board member for the British Association for Black and Minority Engineers. Lindsay Redman is a graduate student at Vanderbilt University, where she studies cancer biology and biochemistry. She's in her 4th year of graduate school, where she more specifically works to identify therapeutic targets for triple-negative breast cancer. Lindsay has completed research at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, and was selected in 2015 as a Rhodes Scholar finalist. Finally, we have Gregory Zaborski, a graduate student at Stanford University, studying materials science and engineering. He is now in his 1st year of graduate school, working on next-generation high-performance devices, such as quantum hardware technologies, energy storage systems, and organic-inorganic electronics. Gregory is an NSF GRFP Fellow and he recently interned at Microsoft as a quantum research intern. So thank you to all of our panelists, and I'd like to start off by asking each of our panelists to provide any insights about their experience with applying and succeeding in graduate school. So first, Emily, would you like to talk about your experience?
Yes, so I am a fourth-year grad student at MIT, but I did my undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh, and I did a bachelor's degree in physics and in computer engineering. And then I applied to graduate school directly after my undergrad experience. I didn't take a year off or anything. So I'm in physics, so I had to take both the regular GRE, which I took once, and then the physics GRE, which I actually took 3 times. It's offered 3 times a year, so I took it the springtime, which is typically in April, and then both fall times, which are like September and October, or October and November. And then I applied for several fellowships, and as was mentioned, I received 3 of them, the NSF, the NDSCG, and the CSGF, but you can only accept 1 federal fellowship, so I'm currently on the Computational Science Graduate Fellowship, which I would be happy to talk more about if people are interested in, but it's generally for computational science in a variety of fields. And then basically I first did the applications for the fellowships, and then using that I applied to grad schools. So I applied to, I believe, 12 grad schools, and then which I think is a fairly typical number in physics. And typically in physics you just send out the applications without really contacting professors. You just customize it perhaps to the school, and then you see where you get in, and then you visit some schools and decide what you want to do. And luckily I got into several schools I was interested in, so I visited them, and then I chose MIT. And I can talk more about, the actual grad school process if people are interested, but I think that's enough for the introduction.
Yes, thank you. So next, Dev, would you like to share some of your experience?
Sure. My name is Dev. I'm a second-year PhD student at Princeton in math, specifically in applied and computational math, where I study machine learning. So when I first entered undergrad, I didn't know what I wanted to study, and I kind of took a random slew of courses, and eventually I realized that I wanted to study math and computer science, where I was particularly focused in applied linear algebra. Eventually, I thought that I might want to go to grad school, so when I applied, I picked a few programs that I thought were really interesting, where there were faculty who were researching things that I thought I wanted to do. So I applied to 5 or 6 grad schools, half CS, half math. For math programs, I had to take the math subject test of the GRE, which was definitely the worst testing experience I've ever had. But I got through it. I also, I'm sure some of you who are applying to grad school feel this way. I wasn't really sure if I was going to get into grad school. So I also applied to jobs in industry, and I actually accepted a job offer. I found out that I got into my top choice, which was Princeton, kind of late, like end of February. And so because I got in, I came and visited, and I knew that I wanted to come here. So I accepted a position in grad school and sent a very awkward email to a previous employer that I wasn't actually going to go to industry anymore. So I'm very excited that I chose to come to grad school. I absolutely love my program here, and I'm more than happy to talk about applying to math, deciding if you want to go to grad school at all, and sort of my path here.
Thank you. And Naomi, could you share your experience? Oh, sorry, it looks like we can't hear you.
Sorry, I
There
was
we
on
go.
mute. So I graduated from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County last year, 2018, and I applied for graduate schools in my senior year of undergrad. And I was pretty certain that I wanted to do graduate school from the beginning of undergrad, but I just didn't quite know where exactly I wanted to do it. But towards the end of undergrad, I was realizing that I really enjoyed the interdisciplinary and also like international aspect of science, and I wanted to work in an international lab for graduate school. So I was looking into options of how I could possibly do graduate school abroad. So I spent most of my application process looking into how different scholarships that are available for graduate school, specifically in the UK. So I was applying for like the Rhodes and the Marshall, the Gates Cambridge, scholarships like that. But I also applied to some U.S. universities also. But something that I think is interesting is sort of the differences between the British and American processes. There are some overlaps, but it is interesting that, for example, in the British programs, things like GREs don't really matter. So of course I took them, but now I'm in England and it didn't matter that I took them, but I took them twice just in case. But in the British system, some things matter more, such as interviews and more of your idea of how the world, like how you want to change the world. Those sorts of more like worldly things matter a little bit more. And that's something that came a little more naturally to me. So that's kind of how that worked out. But yeah, that's basically my process. Now I'm at Oxford doing a program. It's a general engineering program. They don't really do disciplines here, but my background is in chemical engineering. And I've actually switched kind of field, so now I'm doing more of nuclear. So if anyone has any questions about that, I can definitely answer.
Awesome, thank you. Lindsay.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on here, and congratulations to all the Goldwater Scholars. It's a really awesome opportunity, and it's going to change your life and set you up for success no matter what you do. So I graduated in 2015 from New Mexico State University, and I graduated in December. So I had applied to graduate programs that fall and actually conveniently was working while I was going on interviews, which made life a lot easier. And originally, I actually wasn't sure that I should apply to graduate school because while I had many research opportunities and a lot of experiences in undergrad, I loved science, but I really didn't feel strongly about what I was doing at the time. And a lot of my friends loved their research and they would sleep in their labs if they could. And I never felt that way about what I had done. So I was really struggling for a while. And I actually got encouraged to apply. And my advisor told me, it's not going to hurt anything. Apply and check it out. So I did. And I applied to, I think, 8 or 9 programs. I actually didn't know what type of science I wanted to be in because my experiences spanned biology, chemistry, and physics. And so I applied to chemistry programs, umbrella biological science programs, as well as biophysics programs. And I guess one piece of advice that I like to give is that don't be afraid to do something new in graduate school because everything's new in graduate school, so it doesn't really matter what you end up doing. You'll teach yourself what you need to know. And secondly, it's okay if you're not as passionate about your research as maybe other people around you. I know that's part of it, having imposter syndrome, but I love being in graduate school now because I love to solve problems. And while maybe I'm not as naturally curious as a lot of my peers, I get obsessed, and being obsessed with a problem in graduate school is a great thing to do. So I'm happy to talk more about that, deciding whether graduate school is right for you. And in the end, I ended up choosing Vanderbilt to go to graduate school, not only because I felt like I had lots of opportunities and options for the science, but also because they had an array of other things that I was interested in. I took climate and city into consideration, which many people told me not to, and I'm so thankful that I did that. And other things such as commitment to diversity and inclusion from an institution, support for graduate students, things besides just the science, I took pretty heavy into consideration. I have many thoughts on this. I actually participate in recruitment for Vanderbilt often, but one piece of advice about being successful in graduate school that I have is actually learning how to program, whether that's R or Python. I think that that's super important no matter what you do nowadays. So with that, I'll hand it back, but I'm happy to answer questions, or you can reach out to me on Slack as well.
That's very interesting. Thank you. And then Gregory.
All right. So I started at CC, Community College in Southern California, at Saddleback College. Spent a lot of time there. I didn't really have a strong high school background. Spent 4 years at Community College. Had to start with high school math and a lot of different stuff. So I had a little non-traditional background in that sense. Transferred to UC Berkeley in mechanical engineering. Spent 3 years there. Had a lot of privilege in the sense I got to work at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab for 2.5 years on solar water splitting, doing a lot of synthesis and fabrication of materials, which I fell in love with material science and chemistry. I had a couple friends that were in the material science department, and I was always jealous of all the classes they used to take. I got bored of my classes. So that kind of sparked an interest to go to grad school. Not in the sense to go to grad school, but in the sense to change my major. So I changed it to material science and engineering. I applied to 5 schools. I believe in the idea of like really researching the schools you really want to go to and be stubborn in your dreams. And then I applied to some fellowships. In the sense money talks. If you win NSF or you win DoD, like it's really going to help you a lot. And I guess like one thing of advice is when you do apply to graduate school, reach out to professors before the application, during the application process. Tell them you would like to meet with them and have a meeting. I would say for me, like I was at Berkeley, it was easy for me to go over to Stanford. And if I wanted to stay at Berkeley, it was easy for me to meet with professors as well. And so on and so forth. So if you're near a school that you're trying to go to, reach out to them. Like people are professors are very willing to talk about their research. And if you have like a compelling resume and a compelling personal statement, they're very willing to reach out and talk to you. That's it.
Thank you so much. I'd like to now pass it on to Matt, who will be handling Q&A.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matt Schoenbauer. I'm a 2018 Goldwater Scholar. I'm going to be asking the panelists questions that you send in. Just in case it's not clear to anybody, you have a chat bar where you can send in your questions, and we're looking to take in as many as possible. So just to start off, I think I want to ask the panelists just tell us a bit about how the Goldwater Scholarship influenced the the graduate school application process, whether it helped people recognize that you were a talented student or helped you in any other way. And feel free, panelists, just feel free to chime in at any point.
I think the first thing for me is I can't help but think that the essays that I wrote for the Goldwater Scholarship really helped me craft like my narrative for NSF, for DoD. It might not have been exactly what I wrote for those applications, but it definitely put a really kind of, it solidified a lot of the things I really wanted to talk about.
And I would add that the NSF research proposal, I definitely took my Goldwater proposal and just modified it. And that was a really good starting point because I'd already had a really strong research proposal.
I also, when I applied for Goldwater, this was my junior year, and it turns out that was the perfect time to synthesize a list of all the things that I had done and make sure that I collate, whatever things that I wanted to talk about. It also allowed me to establish with certain faculty members that I wanted letters of recommendation. So when it came time to add letters, it was super convenient to say like, hey, you already wrote me a letter. Can you extend that a little bit? I don't know if everyone's experience is the same, but I actually, for applying to grad school, the hardest part was managing letters because some of my faculty members turned in letters late or were traveling. So just going through that exercise once meant that I already had letters on file with certain people.
I'd say for me, the Goldwater process really helped establish my confidence as a researcher and also as an academic writer, because I think it was my first time really like writing something and submitting it that was about science. I've written applications, of course, to get into university, but it was never about like a scientific experiment that I wanted to run. And I really felt like a researcher for the first time, and that really got me excited about academia and grad school and all of that.
I think I second that. I applied really early. I was a sophomore, and it's funny looking back because I don't think I really understood what I wrote about. But it was my first experience for writing a proposal, and it got me really excited about the process, just learning a new field and being able to write about it. And then, of course, it catalyzes your career after that. It helps you get other fellowships and other research experiences.
Great, wonderful. Okay, so another pretty broad question. Could you each speak a bit about how grad school life differs from life in undergrad?
I can start this one. It's totally different. As an undergrad, you're constantly in the mode of like grades and homework and get this done and get that done. And in grad school, it's all on you. So nobody's telling you what to do. Nobody's telling you what experiments to run. You can generally come into lab, do what you want to do every single day. So it's entirely up to you. And that's very different from undergrad. So I think you have to be really motivated, self-motivated.
One of the aspects that I love the most is that, I think kind of what Lindsay was saying is that I totally own my brain, which means that, if I want to think about some other problem, even though my advisor has research ideas, I can just go wake up one morning, go read some book or paper that I feel like, and write down some things, and that's like a good day of work for me. Also, one of the reasons I was really attracted to the particular program that I'm doing is that I don't have class requirements. And even though I love my class requirements as an undergrad, being able to just do research full time without worrying about other commitments like, turning in homeworks or, doing well on your exams or frankly caring about your GPA is kind of fantastic.
Now, I would say a little different in physics because most physics programs still have some real class requirements, and often they even have a grade requirement in those class requirements. And they might have 1 or 2 rounds of exams on general physics knowledge, not necessarily your research. So I would say for me, maybe the first 2 to 3 years was still a lot of like classes and oral exam. But now that I'm in my 4th year, it's really like I can do research all the time. It's up to me. I don't have to take any classes.
I'd say for me, the thing that I really love is the intellectual freedom, which Lindsay kind of spoke about. So you can really do whatever you want. So you have the time to say you're interested in, I don't know, politics or history or whatever. You can learn about those things, and you can maybe even like join a club that does that, or work. I don't know, you have like a lot of free time, depending on what your requirements are. So I know a lot of universities in the UK, probably most of them, they don't have the course requirement, any of that. So it's just research. And once you figure out sort of your schedule of when you work best and what you want to do with the rest of your time, you can really spend time doing the things that you love, which I've like really enjoyed, getting to explore the UK and meet different people, learn about topics that I never thought I would even get to learn about. So it's fun. I also get to learn how to cook now. I didn't have time for that in undergrad, so little things like that.
Wonderful. Okay, that's great. Now, this is an important one. How do you guys balance prioritizing your mental health in graduate school? We've all heard that, sometimes graduate school can be hard for mental health. So how do you manage that?
So I want to jump in to say that before going to grad school, I actually almost took a year off, just as like a personal year for this exact consideration. So one thing that I looked at for graduate school, for me at least, was looking at institutions that had support structures. And so when picking an institution to go to, just as much as there, excellent academic opportunities that you look for, you want to make sure that your lifestyle is going to be good, especially if you're going to be there for 5 or 6 years. So, one of the things that many grad schools have started to offer are things like free therapy or free counseling. And I think those factors are important. The other, thing that I cared about a lot was building a sense of community. Personally, I like meeting new people and having friends and feeling very comfortable, even, for example, with housing. So I live with 2 other graduate students. And so I knew enough about myself going into grad school that I needed to surround myself with people that I could care about and who would care with me. And that was definitely a big decision, a decision point for me that I figured out, especially during the visits.
I think so this is a really important issue, and I probably don't do as good of a job as I should all the time. But number one is I have a dog, And that's not always recommended, but that's my stress relief. So taking her on runs, or just generally having someone to like cuddle with at the end of a rough day is a fantastic thing. Pets are great. It also forces you to restrict your time in lab, so it makes you be more productive, in my opinion. I think therapy is fantastic and everybody should get it. Whether that's from a professional or just friends. For me, spending time with friends is huge as well, and just relying on your network of peers.
Fantastic. Okay, so this, unless if anybody else has anything they want to say, there's this sort of strategic question. So I think a good number of us are thinking about applying to graduate school in something that isn't exactly what we researched or studied as an undergraduate. So first of all, is this okay? And second of all, would it be better to apply to the thing that we know we want to do but don't have as much background in, or to apply for what we do have our background in and then sort of move around once we're into the program?
I can answer this one. So I think it's definitely best to just apply for the program that you want to do, because like it's been said before in the introductions, you learn so much in graduate school. So even if you did your undergrad in, say, math, you're going to be learning totally different math in grad school. So it really doesn't matter. But also it is good to reach out to, like, say, the supervisor that you might want to be working with, and kind of like talk to them and see, like, do you have any students who have had a background in something different? Like, how was their transition? Maybe talking to the students also.
When I hear this question, I can't help but think of like, it's like a probability question. It's like, should I go this path? Should I go this path? Or should I go this path? If you're really set in, like for myself, like I've heard of many students changing their path while they're in graduate school. So don't be afraid that that's not an option. Be aware that it is. And I can't sit here and tell you that you should do one or the other, but either one is definitely possible. I think you kind of just have to kind of just go with it, and yeah.
Great.
I might also say that it's when you're applying, I would probably recommend, regardless of it, whether it's something you did before or something new, just saying that you really know what you want to do and apply like you really definitely want to do this area. And then once you get there, it's really easy to move around, but they kind of want purpose in the application, regardless of whether or not you stay there. Like, I applied, I talked about some professors, and now I'm not working for any of them, and I'm kind of working for a professor in a different department. But when I was applying, I was like, oh yes, I'm really interested in, this professor's work and this professor's work, but they don't hold you to that.
Yep.
Yeah, I want to chime in again. I definitely did this. Now I'm doing cancer biology, and I had only had a very, very brief experience doing it. When I actually joined my lab, originally I had said I was not going to join a biology lab. I wanted to be as far away from living things as possible. And I ended up joining because I loved my mentor. I chose my mentor instead of the subject. And I'm so grateful that I did that right now. First month in lab, read an entire cancer biology textbook. So it's definitely possible to do whatever you want to do, really.
Awesome. Okay, so can each of you talk a bit about what your plans are for after graduate school?
I guess I'll start. I really don't know so much. So I have the CSGF fellowship, which is through the Department of Energy, and it's partially just a recruiting tool for the national labs. So I spent a summer working at Argonne, and it's definitely something I'm interested in. So I think I would probably do a postdoc either at a national lab or university, and kind of from there decide on, academia versus national lab versus industry. But I really don't know at this point.
So right now, my plan is to go into academia, and right now it's kind of between that and also possibly working in industry, because Fusion has a lot of industries that are sort of cropping up, and I work with a Fusion company here in Oxford, so that might be a route also. But in addition to that, I'd really also like to enter the political realm in some sort of way. So it's kind of up in the air, but I definitely want to do something related to academia, but in a flexible way that encompasses like many different aspects.
For myself, I can see myself as of right now working in industry, but definitely particularly on like research focused for sure. Um, but I could totally see myself being lecturing or of that sort. I think if I miss it enough, maybe down the road you'll see me as a professor or not. But yeah.
I am still thinking about this. I don't really know, but I've definitely ruled some things out. So I'm either between staying in academia or maybe going to a nonprofit and being sort of on the business administration side of things.
Personally, for me, especially the type of research that I'm interested in, there's a lot of excellent industry partners for machine learning. So while I do want to continue doing research, I suspect that I will end up in industry.
All right, wonderful. Okay, could you each share a little bit of advice on how to connect with professors and programs that you're interested in, especially how to do this if you're not nearby them and you can't meet them in person?
I can speak about this. I did this a lot. I guess first, before I even reached out to them, I call this like a little CIA sheet. You have the picture of the professor, you have their name, you have their email, you have the research that they do, you have the research that you love about them, and you kind of write down the skills that you feel is good that would match with them. And then from there, I started reaching out to professors. A lot of professors are open to doing Zoom meetings, which is very nice. I feel like they live on their computer all the time anyway, and they travel a lot. I didn't really have much of a hard trouble going about this process. I think just starting is the biggest thing, and just don't be afraid to reach out. Um, yeah.
Great.
So I actually, I kind of did the opposite. I didn't contact any faculty members beforehand. So in my actual application, like for the statement of purpose that you write, that's where I listed particular faculty members and tried to highlight, maybe some relevant connections. And then so in perhaps about January, I'd say mid-January, I had a couple of faculty members who reached out who wanted to talk, and we set up Skype meetings and we just chatted. But otherwise, at least my personal take on this was that unless if I had some connection to that faculty member, like either my advisor or someone that I'd done research with who could reach out, I thought that it might be better to just put in the application. I will say this though, at the end of the day, I've never done grad school admissions. I'm not a faculty member. I honestly have no idea what faculty look for. So, I'm just kind of speculating as to what sort of worked for me.
Right.
For graduate school at the University of Oxford, you have to submit like a research proposal with your application. So you kind of have to talk to the potential supervisor that you'll be working with, because it's really difficult to switch after you've applied and been accepted to their lab. So kind of like what Gregory's saying, just reaching out to them via email. Some of them won't respond, some of them will. And from there, you can even determine who's going to be a good supervisor or not based off of whether or not they take the time to respond to you being an interested person in their lab. And even just like reading one of their papers and saying like, oh, I really enjoyed reading this paper of yours. Would you mind maybe like we can discuss this? Like just showing interest, the fact that you look them up, read one of their papers. And even talking to the graduate students helps me a lot because I couldn't visit any of the labs. I got a good idea of what the environment was in the lab.
I'd like to have like a little caveat to Naomi's email kind of chat. I think like you got to understand that these professors get like 100, 140 emails a day. If they don't answer, be stubborn. If you really want to work for them, like reach back out to them, and like also be understanding. Like a lot of people have a lot of other things they do in life, and they they have work. Yeah, they're applying for grants. Maybe they're sitting on boards in different companies. They have family, they have kids. Maybe they just bought a new house and they're working on the house. I think the biggest thing is to be very understanding of the situation, and I think that will help.
So I actually never contacted professors either, and I think that this is really program and field specific because so in the chemistry programs I applied to, you often get accepted before you go visit. And in those cases, I think it's important to know who you might want to work with before you go visit. But the umbrella programs I applied to, things where I actually had to interview, I actually would recommend to reach out to the program coordinator. There's usually people who are, this is their job, is to work on admissions. At least that's how it is at Vanderbilt. And these people actually can connect you with professors they think you might be interested in, people they know are going to be taking students, people they know have funding. So a lot of times your best resources, instead of, looking at old 20-year-old websites, is to actually reach out to administrators at the universities. So, but again, I think that this is a pretty field specific area.
All right, great. I'm going to throw 2 questions at you all right now. I want everybody to answer the first, and I want to just pose the second right now because it's a really good question that'll probably take you a minute to think about. So the first question is, do you have tips for studying the GRE? Should be pretty straightforward. Second question is, when talking to a potential advisor during the application process, what are the most important questions to ask? Okay, so GRE tips, go for that.
Well, I would say for the general GRE, don't really stress about it too much. I think I just bought a standard GRE prep book. I did the book and I took it once and that was it. I think for like physics, all they care is that your math is somewhat decent to show you remember, high school math, and that your English is good enough that you like probably speak English decently. But then if you're not a native English speaker, they also have like the TOEFL scores. So I don't really think they put much weight in it at all. For the physics GRE, there's really like one book out there that someone wrote that's somewhat decent, and I did the book. Like I took it once without studying. I didn't do very well. I studied over the summer, and then I took it twice in the fall. So that if there's a subject test, I mean, some schools don't even care about the subject test, but if the school does, then I would put much more effort into the subject test.
I strongly agree with what Emily said. And just to add to that, for in terms of studying, sometimes you can find. Actually, I'm unclear if these are legitimate resources, but if you just Google around a little bit, you can definitely find like PDFs of exams that were released historically. So practice, when I took the math GRE, I don't think it had any correlation with things that I actually cared about or wanted to study, but it's a necessary process, and some of the schools like Princeton required it, so I didn't have a choice. You're probably, I can't say it's a pleasant process, but there's ways to practice and study for this exam. The general GRE, take it maybe a few practice tests and see how you do.
For myself, I would say don't stress too much about it, but definitely approach it in the sense that, hey, I only want to take this thing once. If you don't do well, take it again if you like. But for me, I didn't do very well, but I felt that my application held weight in other things. And there's definitely different approaches in life, and not one is better than the other.
Yeah, I definitely second that. I actually purposefully applied to universities that did not require the subject test. And this is all because I wasn't convinced I wanted to go to graduate school anyway, so I wasn't about to spend that much time and effort on that. And for the actual GRE, I think I just bought like one of the standard textbooks, and I maybe took 2 weeks off to study, but I actually didn't study that much, and I got pretty average scores. I only took it the one time, and I'm grateful that I did. I felt very much that my application was really strong in other areas, and if the school didn't want me because of, a test that's not even a good test of your intelligence, then I didn't want to go there anyway. That's kind of the approach that I took.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, I guess, financially, see if you can maybe get a fee waiver. Sometimes if you talk to your university, like scholarship office or something like that, they sometimes have like half off or something, and that can really come in handy if you do have to take the exam again, because it is quite expensive.
Great.
Oh, I want to add one more thing. In the biological sciences, there's actually a growing trend that a lot of places are getting rid of the GRE. So keep that in mind as well. These places exist.
Cool, wonderful. Okay, now the question I posed earlier. So when talking to a potential advisor during the application process, what are the most important questions to ask them?
So I guess I can start off, and say, I would say maybe the most important questions are what their advising style is like, how often they meet with students, do they have like firm expectations before you graduate, like you have to publish 5 papers before I'll let you graduate, and one of them has to be in Nature, which is probably someone here at MIT, which is not my advisor, but there are professors at MIT that are kind of like that. So, and also like, do you have expectations of what hours we're going to work? I would say, and the research is important too, but I mean, if you're talking to them, they're probably somewhat you're probably somewhat interested in their stuff. And I wasn't particularly tied to like one specific type of research, so I was pretty willing to work on any project that was in his group. Maybe also if there's other people on the projects for mentoring, like are there postdocs or there older grad students? And then looking up if the advisor has tenure, or tenure's coming up might also be important. But I would say more just like work-life balance things, and then also talking to their grad students is more important than like what specific project are you going to have for me, because you never know what they're actually going to be doing when you get there.
So I think for me, I think one of the things that I'm sure many people feel this way is that there is this sort of sense of respect or this power dynamic where, you know, these faculty members kind of control your life a little bit for 5 years and they're very influential in your career. That being said, as a grad student, you are doing a job and you're doing an important job for your advisors. So I think, you know, if you're just honest about what you want out of a working environment in terms of hours or lifestyle or whatever it is, you should make sure that that faculty member is going to support that, because honestly, if that person won't support the lifestyle that you want, it's going to generate conflict, and you might as well know that in advance. So the questions you should ask, like, I don't know if my questions would apply to anyone else, just because, you know, my lifestyle might be a little bit different from what any particular person would want. But it's like what I did before I talked to anyone was actually write down, here are the things that are actually important to me in ranked order. And I went into every meeting that I had with a potential advisor and said, hey, here are things that I care about. How do you feel about these things? And there's some advisors whose research was amazing and I wanted to work with them, but they didn't satisfy any of these criteria that I had. And so I found someone else. And the universities you go to are probably going to be fairly large. And although faculty members have different interests, you'll probably be able to find someone that you can work with. Personally, at Princeton, I went through like 15 different advisor meetings to find the exact person I wanted to work with.
I can talk on this too. I guess the first thing you should understand is that like when you do have this interview, the interview is a two-way street. You should understand that like, hey, you're just as much in control of the interview as they are. And also like be yourself. Start off with start the conversation off, lead the conversation. Talk about like the experiences you had in your resume, but don't just like list them off. Like tell a story, captivate the professor that you're talking to, and really kind of tell them the things that you've learned and kind of like show them how you've grown. Tell them your journey. Oh, and so some questions. So I care a lot about like your research culture, like your dynamic within like your lab. So there was one question that I asked. I asked, do your students, like during summer, do they have lunch together? It's kind of like a weird question to ask, but it really kind of tells you if like, do people in the lab kind of like hang out? If they have lunch together during the summer, you can kind of tell like people kind of like each other and the culture is really nice. And there's like one question that I always like I ended with was, is there a question that I didn't ask that you may thought that I should have asked? It really puts the professor kind of like on his toes, and it really helps him, like it really forces him to really think. But yeah.
Yeah, I would really, I approach this scenario almost like dating in a way. And like I said, I chose my advisor, not my lab. And the biggest question I think is make sure that they have funding for you. So that's always an important thing to ask. And then, yeah, I agree. Ask all of the lifestyle questions. Is it okay if I work these hours? I have a dog. Is it okay if I occasionally have to run home? Things like that. But I also think it's super important to talk to graduate students, because a lot of times you get the more honest answers from the grad students about these things as well.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so this is a question directed specifically to Naomi. It's about international graduate schools, but if others have insight into this, please do speak up. So The question is, how do you even start the process of applying to labs and programs that are abroad? Like, do you apply to schools where it's not an English-speaking country, and where do you find information about this? Tell us a little bit more about your experience there, Naomi.
I only applied to English-speaking universities, so I can't speak on applying to non-English speaking universities, but the main place where I started was with my university scholarship office. So every university has a person who is in charge of the scholarship, sending the scholarship applications. And it's typically the person that you worked with for Goldwater. I mean, at least at my university, but it might be different depending on what university you're at. But there's one person for most, like at least most British scholarships, there's one person at your university who decides who gets to apply and then like puts forth the application. So registering your interest with them as soon as possible is always ideal so that they can start giving you tips and advice and putting you into contact with other people who have applied or won, if your university has other people who have applied or won for these scholarships. There's a wealth of information on the internet that's available, but you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. It's really best to talk to someone who's gone through the process for your specific program at the university that you plan to apply to, because you can find all kinds of things on the internet and it can sort of be outdated depending on when the information is from. But the main place where I started was making sure that I was prepared in terms of my mindset for the application. So the key difference between American applications and British applications, at least, is that they care more about what impact you want to have on the world. And in my American applications, it was more so like, what research do you want to do? Like, it was more along the lines of my like scientific self, but the British applications cared a lot more about like just every part of me and policy, science, how it interacts with social science, humanity. Like they care a lot about interdisciplinary thinking, which is something that takes time for you to sort of think about, okay, I'm working on, say, cancer biology, but how does that play into the big scheme of life? Staying up to date with news is also very important. Taking a lot of time to write your essays is super important, and making sure that you find a research group. If you're applying for a PhD, make sure you find a solid research group and you talk to the supervisor before you apply, because that matters so much for the application. If there's no match to a supervisor, then they can't accept you because the programs are too short for you to supervise shop.
So I actually had considered going abroad. Particularly I was considering going to Cambridge, and one of the big considerations for me, honestly, is like I did not realize like how much being a U.S. citizen, going to a U.S. grad school mattered, because you're suddenly eligible for so many things here, and ultimately just comparing like the programs, kind of point by point, it turns out that at least for a lot of UK programs, like the PhD is 3 years. Whereas here the average length is more like 5 years. And I thought that I wanted probably more time to actually focus on producing research and having a lot more space to be able to do that. Also, I considered going back to France to study. At least this is my experience in France, their language of instruction is French, so definitely you should know the language if you're going to a country that doesn't speak English. But again, yeah, I didn't even get to the point where I was applying to the French schools that I wanted to go to, simply because it turns out that for an international student, it's way harder. And at US-based institutions, it's a much easier time if you're a US citizen. And in terms of grant eligibility, there's just so many more things you can do if you have citizenship. So it's kind of a tricky issue. And although I think I might have wanted to have gone abroad, it turns out that in terms of like just living my life, staying in the US was going to be the best option for me.
All right, wonderful. So there's a question here about whether it's frowned upon in graduate school applications to have worked in a lot of different labs throughout your undergrad, and whether it's better to have committed to one for a very long time, or if it's okay to jump around a bit.
I could speak to this. I did a lot of research at a bunch of different labs. I think it's all about how you like approach the conversation with the professor that you're interviewing with. You should control the narrative in the sense, really kind of show that, hey, I've done a lot of like this research in a lot of these different labs, and it brings a lot of like diverse perspectives to your research. I think you should approach it in that way.
So I think one I bounced around actually to 4 different research groups when I was an undergrad. One of the most important things that I learned to do though was to create some kind of like concrete final product. And so I don't necessarily mean a paper, but even just giving a talk or preparing some kind of end material on whatever it is that you do in that lab was very helpful when putting things down into an application and also for asking for letters.
All right, great. So there's a question recently asked, how do you guys, or how do you expect you would have handled graduate school rejections?
Well, I mean, I got some rejections, but they weren't to maybe my top choices, so that made it easier. But I did kind of, in physics grad school, I feel like they let us in very different times depending on the school because the committees all meet at different times. So you might have heard from the first school in like January and the last school not until like late March. So you do kind of just have to start you might even visit a school before you even heard from your top schools. Sometimes the middle ranked schools let you in first, so you already have to go and visit, like this might be the school you go to. You have to take those visits seriously because you have like kind of no idea what you're going to hear from the other schools. So I would say you just take them seriously, but don't apply to anywhere you wouldn't go because that's just like a waste of your time. So that would be like my main advice.
Something that I've heard happen for a lot of American universities is if you end up getting, say, an NSF grant or something like that, and you get that after you've been, say, waitlisted or rejected from a university, then sometimes they can reconsider. So being persistent also can be useful.
I think I would say take it as a blessing in disguise. The rejections I got were because I wasn't a good fit for the program. And so ultimately I wouldn't have been successful or happy at these places. It's a little bit hard to take in the moment. Rejection's never easy, but I definitely would take it as a blessing.
Personally, I really like raw cookie dough. That always helped me get through my rejections.
Awesome. Okay. So we're going to be wrapping up fairly soon here. So I want to ask a really broad question to finish it up. Are there things that you guys realize that you could have or should have done differently when looking for schools and applying to schools and maybe even making your decisions?
I feel like when I was visiting schools, maybe I should have paid a little more attention to the actual requirements for the program. I thought a lot about, does this place have kind of at least 2 professors I'd want to work for, which I think was a good thing to look at. But I kind of don't think I realized how different the number of classes required and the number of exams required differed by physics program depending on the school. So in retrospect, I probably maybe would have still chosen where I am, but I would have thought about that as like a more important criteria because it could easily add a year or 2 to your PhD.
One of the biggest regrets that I have is that I didn't apply for any fellowships as a senior in college. So I'm a second year PhD student now, and I'm actually applying for NSF and NDSAG and all these other fellowships that I'm still eligible for. And I think that, it ends up becoming a little bit harder in grad school. It ends up becoming just a little bit tougher because it's not like I've done a ton of research just in my first year. So I think while I'm super, super glad with how I made a decision on grad school, I think that as a part of the application process, I wish I knew to apply to fellowships.
Yeah, for me, I'd say something I didn't really consider much is how it would feel to live in a different country. I was more so just thinking about the program and what I wanted to do. But there are difficult factors of that you have to consider in terms of like being away from family, dealing with different climate. It's very cold in England. Dealing with just like different cultures. Those are things I didn't even cross my mind until I came here, and I was sort of smacked in the face with all of these different things, but I already made my choice. So as much as you can consider those things, I think it's important, especially for your mental health.
I think that, I don't know, this is a hard question, but the only thing that I can think of is I actually wish that I would have gone on less interviews. And I didn't even go on that many compared to a lot of people that I know. I think I went on 8. And they're very stressful. They take a lot of time. The reality is, I think you generally have your top choices, places that you know you would not want to go to. And so I guess I wouldn't go on interviews to schools that I knew I really probably didn't want to go to anyway. So I probably would have narrowed down my list a little bit more.
I don't have anything to add to this.
Okay.
I went, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of really fantastic information shared here. So thank you all very much. I'm going to hand it off to Aaron now, who's going to close us up.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everybody. My name is Aaron Sandoval, and I am a 2018 Goldwater Scholar from the University of Florida. Go Gators. If you still have any questions that we weren't able to cover tonight, please go ahead and ask them on the Slack channel at Grad School Discussion. There are a ton of scholars there who can offer advice to help you out. And also to stay in the loop, be sure to follow the Goldwater Facebook account and Twitter account at GoldwaterSC, which features scholar highlight articles. Our new podcast titled Goldwater Scholar Highlights is another great way to learn about your fellow scholars and the amazing work that they do. It's available on SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. Be sure to tell any Goldwater applicants you know to check it out. Finally, I just want to finish by thanking everyone who made this event possible. Dr. Matea, Daniela, Matt, the Goldwater Scholar Council, Laura and Linda from Scholarship America. Thank you also to the panelists for sharing their experiences and all the scholars who tuned in tonight from around the world. Have a good night, everyone.